Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring. Probably two of the most talked about Souls games in the Soulsborne community, but which one of these two is actually more challenging? This is exactly what I wanted to talk about in this short and sweet video with you guys. As somebody who's finished Elden Ring more than once and I'm almost done with my first playthrough in Dark Souls 3, I've noticed a bunch of differences that impact the game's difficulty. Now let's be honest, regarding which one is actually more difficult, the answer to this question is based on people's personal experience and preference, but I do know for a fact there is certain factors that make one more difficult than the other. So grab some snacks, lay back, and let's dive right in. Now, before we continue on with the video, I'm literally gonna answer the question this whole video is based on. For me, Elden Ring was harder than Dark Souls 3. But, and the big but here, I've done my research. I've looked in Discord servers, I've looked in Reddits, I looked in many forums, and I know there is a lot of people who think Dark Souls 3 is harder than Elden Ring. And there's good reason for that too. Before we tackle that, I'm gonna tell y'all why I think Elden Ring is harder, or at least it was for me, from my experience. Firstly, it's the open world. I know many people are like, yeah, you have a massive open world, which means more weapons, more ways to farm rooms and upgrade and do this and that. But you gotta remember, as somebody like me who literally picked Elden Ring up as their first ever Souls game, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And when the big open world was thrown at me, you know, like after the tutorial of the game when the door opens to Limgrave and there is a massive open world, when I was in that spot, I was so overwhelmed. Maybe for the OG Souls players, a big open world in a Souls game like Elden Ring isn't really that intimidating. I was lost. I was fully lost in the big massive open world. Of course, I didn't know any ways to upgrade, to get weapons, to do anything for that matter. You know how I'd put it though? I actually saw this on Reddit and I really liked this quote. Elden Ring is harder than Dark Souls 3 at the start, but when you get closer to the ending, it becomes easier. And I actually completely agree with this quote, mainly because at first, the massive open world, all the options you have, all the ways you can go, all the classes you can be, all the builds you can do, it's overwhelming. But once you actually get used to how Elden Ring is paced and do more research, the game does get easier. It's a very slow process, and it's one of the main reasons so many people were like, oh my god, a new open world Souls game Elden Ring, and 5 minutes into it they quit, because the learning curve in Elden Ring is long. And you'll have to remember, Elden Ring got Game of the Year 2022, and for great reason. It's FromSoftware's biggest success to this day, because of how popular it got. Elden Ring is the Souls game that brought the most amount of people to the Soulsborne genre. When people played Elden Ring as their first Souls game, after that they were interested in Bloodborne and maybe Dark Souls 3 and maybe Sekiro. What I'm trying to say is that Elden Ring brought the most amount of newbies, new players, to this whole genre of FromSoftware games. And this is another reason why so many people found Elden Ring the hardest, because you're new to the mechanics, you're new to the whole, you have to dodge, parrying, to stuff like that. And if we compare it to Dark Souls 3 like we do in this video, let's be honest, Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3 regarding movement, they're very alike, right? In every way, shape and form. So for people like me, after I finished Elden Ring more than 2 times and I get into Dark Souls 3, I'm already used to the combat mechanics, the movement, and the fact that I have to dodge on time not to get hit. So I really think that whichever Souls game you started with, Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, I think that impacts a lot on what you'll find easier in the future. Does that make sense? Now, a key element of any Souls game are boss fights, and Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring have plenty. I gotta say that bosses in both of these games are incredible. I really enjoyed them. Although for me, Elden Ring's boss fights were way harder, but Dark Souls 3's boss fights were designed better. Let me explain. From my experience, Elden Ring's bosses have way more difficult attack patterns to learn. It took me more time to learn how to fight a boss in Elden Ring compared to Dark Souls 3, because a lot of bosses in Elden Ring leave a very small room of attack. It sometimes can get to a point with more difficult bosses where it gets ridiculous. Although Dark Souls 3, on the other hand, the bosses in this game felt more like a dance. It felt so good, so satisfying, because the window of attack for players is larger, and it makes the boss fights easier, but it also makes them more fluent. It makes them more satisfying in a way. This could be completely different for some of you. Let me know in the comments down below, which game do you think has more difficult bosses, Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3? But for me, Elden Ring is the tougher game in this department. Now let's switch the tables around here and talk about why Dark Souls 3 is the harder game compared to Elden Ring for a lot of people. The number one reason is the exact same one I gave for Elden Ring: the open world and the environments especially. Dark Souls 3 is a linear game, way more linear than Elden Ring for that matter. There is one way you can go and maybe venture out to a few other paths, but mostly you're going to be in point A, going to point B in just one way. And that can make the game way more difficult, because there's not a lot of room to be flexible. You can't really venture out to farm like you can in Elden Ring. Not to mention the variety of weapons and spells is smaller, and probably the biggest thing that actually I felt while playing Dark Souls, and I still do play the game because I'm almost done with it, is the fact that you sometimes feel trapped. Especially after I finished Elden Ring, I jumped on this game, and in certain spots I feel like there's just too much going on. Especially indoors, the game throws so many enemies at you, I literally don't even fight any of them, I just run. And I sometimes feel trapped going from boss to boss, because in Elden Ring, if you can't fight a boss or you don't want to fight it, you just go back and go the other way, maybe find another easier boss, maybe farm some more runes or do whatever, because you can. But in Dark Souls 3, you really can't. Once you reach the boss and you can't beat it, well, you just kinda have to try again and again, and hopefully you beat it. You know what I mean? There's not really a lot of room to work with, which actually did put some challenge on the game, if you ask me. Now, if we talk about more things that make Dark Souls 3 harder than Elden Ring, I have to get into what makes Elden Ring easier, because there's a few things. Regarding boss fights, Elden Ring's boss fights may be harder, but at the same time, you can cheese a lot of them. If not, literally every boss in the game is cheesable. Cheesable, is that a word? Anyway, you can cheese your way out of boss fights in Elden Ring. I don't know if you can do that in Dark Souls 3. I'm still way newer to Dark Souls 3 than I am to Elden Ring, but in Elden Ring it's a common thing. They did patch it a little, but you can still cheese your way through many bosses. With that being said, if we were to say which game is harder between these two, it would literally be impossible, because as I mentioned previously, it mostly depends on which one you started first or your previous experiences with these type of games. I told you guys my opinion and why I think Elden Ring was harder for me. Let me know in the comments down below where you stand with this. Do you agree with me, Elden Ring is harder, or do you think Dark Souls 3 caused you more of a challenge? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you did enjoy watching this video till the end as much as I enjoyed making it, feel free to hit that like button. If you're new and want to keep in touch with the content, maybe you want more Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring videos on the channel, make sure to subscribe. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. See you in the next one. Peace!